There is a dangerous illusion surrounding kindness. Society teaches us that the gentle person is harmless, that the one who forgives repeatedly will forgive forever, that the one who always listens will never stop listening, that the one who sacrifices themselves for everyone else will continue sacrificing until the end of their life. But after years of studying the human psyche, I discovered something deeply unsettling. The quietest soul often carries the greatest storm, and when that storm is ignored for too long, its release can transform an entire personality. Today, I want to tell you about one of the most psychologically disturbing patterns I ever observed. It is not merely the story of anger, nor revenge, nor emotional collapse. It is the story of what happens when a deeply compassionate individual reaches the absolute limit of psychological endurance. The day the empath snaps. Many people misunderstand the empath. They imagine an empath as someone who simply feels emotions more deeply. Someone who cries easily, who avoids conflict, who naturally cares for others. But this definition barely scratches the surface. The true empath possesses something far more powerful. They instinctively absorb the emotional atmosphere surrounding them. Before a single word is spoken, they notice tension. They recognize hidden grief. They sense fear behind confidence, loneliness behind laughter, resentment behind politeness. While others hear conversations, the empath hears contradictions. While others notice behavior, the empath notices suffering. This extraordinary perception appears beautiful from the outside, yet inwardly, it often becomes an unbearable burden, because once you begin feeling what others refuse to feel, peace becomes difficult to maintain. Imagine walking through life carrying not only your own emotions, but fragments of everyone else's. Every broken heart, every silent disappointment, every hidden anxiety, every unspoken resentment. You become a collector of invisible wounds. The tragedy is that few people recognize what this costs. Society praises compassionate people. It admires those who always help, who always understand, who always forgive. Yet almost no one asks, who heals the one carrying everyone else's pain? This question haunted many of my patients. They entered my office exhausted, not physically, psychologically. They described an emptiness they could not explain. They loved deeply, gave generously, listened patiently, forgave endlessly. Yet each year, they felt smaller, weaker, further away from themselves. At first, they believed life had simply become difficult, but as I explored the unconscious, another pattern slowly revealed itself. These individuals had spent so much time understanding everyone else that they had forgotten how to understand themselves. Every relationship followed the same invisible script. Someone suffered. The empath rescued them. Someone collapsed. The empath became their strength. Someone felt lost. The empath became their direction. Over time, helping transformed into identity. Without realizing it, their value no longer came from being themselves, it came from being needed. This distinction is extraordinarily dangerous, because the moment your identity depends upon another person's suffering, you unconsciously begin abandoning your own life. Your dreams become postponed, your boundaries disappear, your emotions become secondary, your exhaustion becomes normal. Eventually, you no longer know where another person's pain ends and your own begins. I often describe this as psychological fusion, a state where healthy emotional boundaries slowly dissolve. The unconscious no longer distinguishes my suffering, your suffering. Everything becomes one overwhelming emotional experience. At first, this creates extraordinary compassion. Later, it creates profound confusion. The empath begins apologizing for things they never caused, feeling guilty for problems they never created, accepting blame they never deserved. They become emotionally responsible for every room they enter. If someone feels uncomfortable, they immediately search for what they did wrong. If someone grows distant, They assume they failed. If someone becomes angry, they instinctively attempt to restore peace. Notice what has happened. Their nervous system has quietly accepted responsibility for emotions that never belonged to them. This is not love. It is unconscious conditioning. Most empaths never realize when this conditioning began. Often, it started in childhood. Perhaps they grew up inside unpredictable homes. A father whose moods changed without warning. A mother carrying silent sadness. Arguments that filled the house with tension. As children, they unconsciously learned survival. Watch carefully. Stay quiet. Keep everyone happy. Prevent conflict before it begins. Gradually, hyper-awareness became normal. Their nervous system adapted. Even as adults, they continued scanning every environment for emotional danger, not because danger still existed, because the unconscious remembered. Trauma rarely disappears. It simply changes clothing. A child who constantly monitored angry parents may later become an adult constantly monitoring unhappy partners. The faces change. The psychological pattern remains until consciousness finally interrupts it. This is why the empath's greatest gift often becomes their greatest prison. Their extraordinary perception, which could have become wisdom, instead becomes constant emotional vigilance. They stop living. They begin monitoring. They stop creating. They begin rescuing. They stop becoming themselves. They become whatever everyone else requires. Years pass this way, sometimes decades. The outside world sees only kindness, patience, generosity, calmness. No one notices the invisible pressure building beneath the surface. Imagine a great dam holding back millions of gallons of water. From the outside, everything appears peaceful. The structure looks strong, stable, reliable, but deep within, pressure quietly increases. Every disappointment adds another drop. Every betrayal, another stream. Every ignored emotion, another river. Nothing appears dangerous until one day, the pressure exceeds the structure's ability to contain it. The collapse appears sudden, but psychologically, it began years earlier. Exactly the same happens within the empath. People often say, "I never saw it coming. They were always so calm." They suddenly became a completely different person. No, they did not suddenly change. The unconscious had simply reached its limit. Everything that had been swallowed, silenced, forgiven, ignored, suppressed, finally demanded expression. This is what terrified me most, not the anger itself, but how invisible its approach had been. Because unlike ordinary rage, the empath's breaking point arrives silently. Long before anyone else notices, their soul has already begun leaving the relationship, leaving the friendship, leaving the life that required constant self-sacrifice. Outwardly, they continue smiling, helping, listening. But inwardly, something fundamental has shifted. The unconscious quietly whispers words the conscious mind has been too afraid to speak. Enough. At first, the whisper is almost impossible to hear. Then it grows louder. Each act of disrespect strengthens it. Each betrayal feeds it. Each manipulation confirms it. Until eventually, the whisper becomes a voice impossible to ignore. And on the day that voice finally speaks aloud, everyone around them believes the empath has become someone they no longer recognize. The truth is far more unsettling. For the first time in years, the empath has stopped abandoning themselves. There is one mistake society repeatedly makes. It confuses silence with weakness. The individual who rarely argues is assumed to have no anger. The one who always forgives is believed incapable of resentment. The one who constantly gives is expected to give forever. But the unconscious never works this way. Nothing that is repeatedly suppressed simply disappears. Every ignored emotion descends into the shadow, and the shadow never forgets. Throughout my work, I observed that the kindest individuals often carried the most neglected shadows, not because they were more violent, Not because they secretly wished to hurt others, but because they had spent years refusing to acknowledge their own human limits. They believed anger made them a bad person, so they buried it. They believed saying no was selfish, so they remained available. They believed conflict destroyed love, so they accepted disrespect in silence. Little by little, their authentic emotions disappeared beneath the persona they had created. The persona of the helper, the healer, the peacemaker, the one who understands everyone, the one who forgives everything. At first, this identity brought admiration. People praised their patience, their compassion, their endless generosity. But the unconscious pays little attention to applause. It only asks one question: are you living truthfully? If the answer becomes no, the psyche begins demanding balance. This is one of the greatest laws governing the human mind. Whatever consciousness refuses to express, the unconscious eventually expresses for it. Softly at first, through fatigue, through anxiety, through emotional numbness, through recurring dreams, through unexplained sadness. These are not random symptoms, they are messages. The unconscious speaks in feelings long before it speaks in catastrophe. Yet most empaths ignore these messages because they have spent their lives ignoring themselves. When exhaustion appears, they rest for one evening, then continue sacrificing. When resentment appears, they immediately feel guilty. When intuition whispers, "Leave," they stay. When their soul quietly says, "This relationship is destroying you," they answer, "Maybe I just need to love harder." Notice the tragedy. The very quality that makes them beautiful becomes the instrument of their suffering. Compassion without boundaries slowly transforms into self-abandonment. One afternoon, a patient sat across from me and said something I never forgot. She looked completely calm. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Then she said, "I don't think I know who I am anymore." Not because she had lost her memory, but because she had spent 15 years becoming whatever everyone else needed. She had become the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect friend, the perfect listener, the perfect employee. Everyone knew exactly who she was. Except her. I asked a simple question. When was the last time you disappointed someone in order to remain honest with yourself? She remained silent, not for seconds, for nearly a minute. Finally, she answered, "I don't remember." That silence revealed everything. She had confused goodness with self-erasure. Many people make this mistake. They believe becoming loving requires becoming invisible. It does not. Authentic love never asks you to abandon your own soul. Only unhealthy attachment demands that sacrifice. The unconscious understands balance, where consciousness insists. Always give. The unconscious quietly asks, "When will you receive?" Where consciousness says, "Keep forgiving," the unconscious asks, "When will you protect yourself?" Where consciousness whispers, "Stay peaceful," the unconscious responds, "Then stop remaining where your peace is constantly violated." This dialogue continues every day inside the psyche. Few people hear it, even fewer obey it. Eventually, the shadow grows impatient. Many misunderstand the shadow completely. They imagine it consists only of hatred, violence, cruelty, dark desires. But the shadow also contains everything beautiful you refuse to own. Your confidence, your independence, your ability to walk away, your healthy anger, your voice, your courage, your right to exist without apologizing. Every time an empath suppresses these qualities, the shadow becomes heavier. Imagine locking a powerful animal inside a small cage. At first, it waits quietly. Then it begins pacing. Eventually, it throws itself against the walls. Not because it desires destruction, because freedom belongs to its nature. Your authentic self behaves the same way. It cannot remain imprisoned forever. This explains why the empath's breaking point often appears completely unexpected. For years, they tolerate everything: disrespect, manipulation, being taken for granted, broken promises, emotional neglect. Then one ordinary day, something insignificant happens: a careless sentence, a forgotten promise, one more selfish demand, and suddenly, everything changes. Those watching from the outside become shocked. Why are you reacting so strongly? It was only a small misunderstanding. But psychologically, it was never about that single moment. That moment simply became the final drop falling into a cup that had been overflowing for years. No one noticed the thousands of previous drops. They only witnessed the flood. The unconscious rarely explodes because of one event. It explodes because countless unfinished emotions finally demand expression together. This is why the empath's anger often feels terrifying. Not because it is irrational, because it has accumulated the weight of years. Years of silence, years of swallowing disappointment, years of pretending everything was fine, years of sacrificing authenticity to preserve peace. When those years suddenly find a voice, even the empath becomes frightened by their own intensity. Many immediately regret it. They apologize, they blame themselves. They wonder if they have become cruel. But I discovered something different. Very often, what they called cruelty was simply honesty they had postponed for too long. The shadow had finally carried truths that consciousness refused to speak, not to destroy relationships, but to rescue the self. Because there comes a point where protecting everyone else begins destroying the person doing the protecting. The psyche recognizes this long before the conscious mind does, and when it finally decides enough is enough, the transformation is irreversible. The old version of the empath, the one who endlessly tolerated being emptied, quietly begins to disappear. In its place, someone new slowly emerges, someone capable of compassion without self-sacrifice, someone capable of kindness without becoming a victim, someone capable of love without abandoning themselves. And that is where the real story begins. There is something even more unsettling than the empath's anger. It is their silence. Most people expect the breaking point to arrive with shouting, arguments, tears, accusations. But in many cases, the final stage arrives without any of these. The empath simply becomes quiet, dangerously quiet. At first, no one notices. They still answer messages, still smile politely, still complete their responsibilities. From the outside, nothing appears different. Yet internally, an extraordinary psychological transformation has already begun. The unconscious has made a decision that consciousness has not yet spoken aloud. The relationship, the friendship, the environment no longer feels like home. People often misunderstand this silence. They believe the empath has become cold, emotionless, indifferent. But this is rarely true. The opposite is happening. The empath has simply become too exhausted to continue explaining wounds that were never heard. For years, they spoke gently. They communicated honestly. They gave second chances, third chances, perhaps even 100 chances. Each conversation carried hope. Hope that this time, someone would finally understand. But hope slowly disappears when truth repeatedly falls upon deaf ears. Eventually, the soul stops asking, not because it no longer cares, because it has finally accepted reality. There is a profound difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up comes from despair. Letting go comes from understanding. The empath eventually realizes a painful truth. Not everyone wishes to grow. Not everyone desires healing. Some people merely seek comfort, even if that comfort requires another person to keep sacrificing themselves. This realization marks the beginning of individuation. Many people misunderstand individuation. They believe it means becoming independent. It means something far deeper. It means becoming psychologically whole. For the first time, the empath begins asking questions they had ignored for years. What do I need? What do I actually feel? Why have I spent my entire life earning love instead of simply receiving it? These questions awaken the self, and once the self begins speaking, the old personality can no longer survive. One of my patients described this experience beautifully. She said, "It feels like I'm grieving someone who is still alive." At first, I believed she spoke about another person. She shook her head. "No. I'm grieving the version of me that accepted everything just to keep everyone else happy." That statement remained with me for years, because it revealed something extraordinary. Before the empath walks away from unhealthy people, they first walk away from an unhealthy version of themselves. That is the true ending, not the relationship, not the friendship, the identity. The old identity dies quietly, and every psychological death feels like mourning. This explains why many empaths disappear without warning. From the outside, it appears sudden, but internally, the departure began months earlier, perhaps years earlier. Every ignored boundary, every broken promise, every act of emotional neglect, every moment they felt unseen, the unconscious recorded everything. People often imagine the unconscious as emotional. In reality, it is remarkably patient. It watches, learns, waits, and then, one day, it quietly decides, this can no longer continue. When that decision arrives, something fascinating happens. The empath no longer argues, because arguing implies hope. Silence often means acceptance, not acceptance of mistreatment. Acceptance that another person has chosen not to change. There is nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. Many people panic at this stage. They suddenly notice the empath has become distant. The endless messages stop. The emotional availability disappears. The desperate attempts to repair every conflict come to an end. Ironically, this is often the moment others finally begin paying attention. They ask, "What's wrong? Why have you changed? Why are you acting differently?" But the answer has existed for years. They simply never listened while the empath was still speaking. Now, the silence says what words never could. There is another reason this stage appears terrifying. The empath no longer reacts. Manipulation stops working. Guilt loses its influence. Criticism no longer controls their emotions. The very strategies that once kept them trapped suddenly become powerless. This confuses those who unconsciously depended upon those patterns. They try harder, they become louder, more dramatic, more emotional. But the empath no longer responds from guilt, they respond from clarity, and clarity cannot be manipulated. Imagine the sun hidden behind thick clouds. For years, the clouds appear permanent. Then one morning, the wind changes, the clouds slowly drift away. The sun did not become brighter. It had always been there. The obstacles simply disappeared. The empath experiences something similar. Their light was never lost. It was hidden beneath years of fear, obligation, and self-neglect. Now, that light begins returning. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because they finally stop giving their energy to what continuously destroys it. This is the beginning of true freedom. Not freedom from difficult people. Freedom from unconscious patterns. Freedom from believing love requires suffering. Freedom from believing kindness requires silence. Freedom from believing peace depends upon everyone else's happiness for the first time. The empath understands a truth that changes everything. You cannot save another soul by abandoning your own, and perhaps that is the most terrifying realization of all. Because once an empath truly understands this, they never return to the person they used to be. There comes a moment in every life when you begin noticing something that once escaped your attention. The people around you have not changed. The world has not become darker. Human nature has remained remarkably consistent throughout history. What has changed is your awareness, and awareness is both a gift and a burden. Because once you truly begin seeing unconscious patterns, you cannot pretend they do not exist. You notice conversations that revolve entirely around negativity. You notice friendships built upon dependency instead of mutual growth. You notice how certain people become energized by conflict rather than peace. You notice how others seek constant attention because they have never learned to sit quietly with themselves. Most importantly, you notice how often you have abandoned yourself simply to keep everyone else comfortable. This realization is painful, but every genuine awakening begins with discomfort. The ego prefers comfortable illusions. The soul prefers difficult truths. For many years, people asked me, how do I protect myself from those who drain my energy? They expected techniques, rules, strategies, perhaps even psychological defenses. But my answer was always deeper than they anticipated. The greatest protection is not building higher walls. It is becoming so deeply rooted within yourself that manipulation no longer finds fertile ground. Think about a magnificent oak tree. It does not argue with the wind. It does not chase every falling leaf. It does not fear each passing storm. Its strength comes from its roots, not its resistance. Likewise, your psychological strength does not come from controlling people. It comes from knowing yourself so completely that no one else's confusion becomes your identity. This is why the journey toward individuation is essential. Individuation is not becoming perfect, it is becoming whole. Most people spend their lives trying to become the version of themselves they believe the world will accept. They hide their fears, suppress their anger, silence their intuition, ignore their dreams. They wear masks for so long that eventually they forget there was ever a face beneath them. The tragedy is not merely living behind a mask. The tragedy is believing the mask is who you are. Your authentic self has never disappeared. It has simply waited patiently, quietly, beneath years of expectations, beneath years of pleasing others, beneath years of pretending to be someone easier to love. The light you believe others have taken from you was never completely lost. It was buried, covered by fear, covered by guilt, covered by endless compromises. But buried light is still light. It only waits for courage. Many people hope one day they will wake up feeling completely confident, fearless, untouchable. That day rarely arrives by accident. Confidence is not discovered, it is built, one truthful decision at a time. Every time you say no when your soul means no, your light grows stronger. Every time you stop apologizing for existing, your light grows brighter. Every time you refuse to betray your values simply to gain approval, another piece of yourself returns home. This is how psychological power develops. Not through domination, not through superiority, but through integrity. Integrity means your inner life and outer life no longer contradict one another. What you believe, what you say, and how you live become one. Such people possess a quiet strength that cannot be manufactured. They rarely need to convince anyone of their worth. They rarely seek attention, because attention is no substitute for inner peace. There is something extraordinary about a person who no longer needs constant validation. Their silence becomes powerful. Their presence becomes calming. Their words become intentional. They stop reacting to every opinion because they understand a profound truth. Not every voice deserves access to your inner sanctuary. Imagine your mind as a sacred garden. Would you allow anyone to walk inside carrying poison? Of course not. Yet countless people allow destructive opinions, constant criticism, endless negativity to occupy their thoughts every single day. Guard your mind with the same care a gardener protects fertile soil. Whatever enters repeatedly eventually grows. Feed your mind resentment, and resentment becomes your personality. Feed it fear, and fear becomes your future. Feed it wisdom, reflection, purpose, and compassion. Those qualities slowly become your nature. The unconscious is always listening. Be careful what you repeatedly tell yourself. Many people have spent years saying, "I'm not enough. Nobody understands me. I'll never change." The unconscious accepts repetition as truth. Eventually, these beliefs become invisible prisons. But the opposite is also true. Every day you choose awareness over reaction, presence over impulse, truth over approval. You reshape the architecture of your own mind. Transformation is never sudden. It is the result of thousands of quiet choices that no one else sees. One day, people will say, "You seem different." And they will be right. Not because you became someone new, because you finally stopped abandoning the person you always were. There is one final lesson I wish to leave with you. Do not spend your life searching for people who will never misunderstand you. They do not exist. Do not waste your years trying to convince everyone to appreciate your heart. Some people are simply unable to recognize what they have never cultivated within themselves. Instead, become the kind of person whose peace no longer depends upon recognition, whose kindness no longer depends upon gratitude, whose confidence no longer depends upon applause, whose purpose no longer depends upon permission. When you reach this place, something beautiful happens. You stop asking, "Who is feeding on my light?" Because you discover a light that cannot be stolen. It may be ignored, it may be criticized, it may even be envied. But it cannot be extinguished, not by rejection, not by betrayal, not by misunderstanding, because it no longer comes from other people. It comes from the deepest center of your being, the place where the self quietly waits beneath every fear, every mask, every wound, every expectation. Return to that place often. Protect it, honor it, listen to it. For the world will always contain those who seek energy they have never learned to create within themselves. Do not hate them, do not fear them. Simply refuse to surrender the light that was entrusted to you. Lead with compassion, walk with discernment, love without losing yourself, give without emptying yourself, forgive without abandoning your boundaries. And remember, your greatest responsibility is not to save every wandering soul. It is to remain faithful to your own. Because when one person becomes fully conscious, they give silent permission for others to begin awakening as well. Perhaps that is how darkness has always been overcome, not by fighting it endlessly, but by becoming so completely alive that your very existence reminds others of the light they have forgotten within themselves. And perhaps that is the real purpose of your journey. Not merely to survive the darkness, but to become the light that darkness can never consume. Thank you for listening. Until our next exploration of the human psyche, remember this. The brightest light is not the one that shines for everyone, but the one that never abandons itself, even in the deepest darkness.